Did you know that the state of New York holds more than half of all the surface fresh water in the United States? A reserve so vast it could supply entire countries for centuries? That within its borders rises the oldest mountain in the nation, formed over 2 billion years ago, long before dinosaurs ever existed. And that its landscape was shaped by colossal glaciers, leaving scars that are still visible today. New York is not just skyscrapers and bright lights. It is ancient water, primal rock, and a land forged by forces far older than civilization itself. Get ready, because today you're about to discover 35 incredible facts about the state of New York that will completely change the way you understand the true power of the northeastern United States. 35. The massive scale of the Adirondack Park. The first thing you have to understand about New York geography is that the Adirondack Park is an absolute behemoth. When I first visited, I expected a standard state park with a few hiking trails and a gift shop, but this place is 6 million acres of protected wilderness. To put that into perspective for you, it is larger than Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Glacier, and Great Smoky Mountains National Parks combined. It is roughly the size of the entire state of Vermont. Unlike a traditional national park, it is a unique patchwork of public and private land, often referred to as a fragmented forest. Because it was created in 1892 to protect the state water supply, it is constitutionally protected to remain forever wild. You could get lost in its thousands of lakes and mountains and never see the same tree twice. It is truly the green heart of the Northeast. 34. The secret maritime border with Rhode Island. Most people can name the states that border New York easily enough, mentioning New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont. However, very few people realize that New York actually shares a maritime border with the smallest state in the Union, Rhode Island. If you stand on the tip of Montauk Point on Long Island and look out over the Atlantic Ocean, you are staring toward a watery boundary line that was settled in the late 20th century. This border exists in the middle of the Block Island Sound. It is a tiny stretch of water where the jurisdiction of the Empire State meets the ocean state. It is one of those geographical quirks that makes for a great trivia question because the two states do not share a single inch of dry land, yet they are neighbors in the eyes of the Coast Guard. Before continuing, be sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire country. 33. The hidden depths of Lake Ontario. While New York is famous for its rivers, it also possesses a massive coastline along 2 of the 5 Great Lakes. Lake Ontario is particularly fascinating because it is the smallest of the Great Lakes by surface area, but it is surprisingly deep and holds an incredible volume of water. It reaches a maximum depth of 802 feet, which means you could stack the Eiffel Tower inside of it and still have water over the top. Because it sits at the base of the Niagara Falls, it receives all the drainage from the other 4 lakes before sending it out to the Atlantic Ocean via the St. Lawrence River. When I stood on the shore in Rochester, I felt like I was looking at the ocean because the horizon just disappears into the blue. It contains enough water to cover the entire state in several feet of liquid. 32. The Arctic tundra of Mount Marcy. If you climb to the highest point in New York, which is the summit of Mount Marcy at 5,344 feet, you will find a landscape that looks like it belongs in northern Canada or Greenland. The very top of the mountain is home to a rare alpine tundra ecosystem. This is a fragile environment where the plants are survivors from the last ice age, clinging to the rocks in a zone where the weather is too harsh for trees to grow. There are only about 85 acres of this specific habitat left in the entire state. I remember the wind whipping across those gray rocks and feeling like I had stepped out of New York and into the high Arctic. It is a reminder that New York geography is not just about urban sprawl, but about high altitude wilderness that has survived for thousands of years. 31. The glacial fingerprints of the Finger Lakes. The Finger Lakes region in central New York is a geographical masterpiece created by the sheer force of retreating glaciers. There are 11 lakes in total, and they are long, narrow, and incredibly deep, resembling the claw marks of a giant across the landscape. Seneca Lake is the deepest of them all, plunging down 618 feet. The indigenous people of the region, the Iroquois, have a beautiful legend that these lakes were formed when the Great Spirit placed his hand on the earth to bless it, leaving behind the imprint of his fingers. From a geological perspective, the massive weight of ice sheets carved out pre-existing river valleys and dammed them with debris. Today, these lakes create a unique microclimate that allows the region to be one of the premier wine-producing areas in the world, as the deep water regulates the temperature of the surrounding hills. 30. The jurisdictional jigsaw of Liberty Island. This is one of my favorite geographical head-scratchers. While the Statue of Liberty is the universal symbol of New York City, the island it sits on has a very complicated relationship with the state of New Jersey. Liberty Island is an exclave of New York, meaning it is legally part of the state of New York, even though it is completely surrounded surrounded by the waters of New Jersey. This was settled by a compact in 1834, but the drama did not end there. In 1998, the Supreme Court ruled that while the original natural island belongs to New York, all the filled land created by humans over the years actually belongs to New Jersey. This created a situation where you can stand on one part of a small island and technically be in a different state than if you walk 20 feet to the left. 29. The Grand Canyon of the East. If you travel to Western New York, you will find Letchworth State Park, which is famously known as the Grand Canyon of the East. The Genesee River has spent thousands of years carving a massive gorge through the rock, with cliffs that rise up to 600 feet high. It is a spectacular sight that looks nothing like the rolling hills or flat plains you might expect in the region. There are 3 major waterfalls within the canyon, and the river twists and turns through the deep rock like a snake. I have hiked many canyons in the western United States, and Letchworth holds its own with its sheer verticality and the lush forests that cling to the edges of the abyss. The geology here reveals layers of shale and limestone that tell the story of an ancient sea that once covered the entire area. 28. The tallest waterfall in the Northeast. Many people assume that Niagara Falls is the tallest waterfall in New York, but that is actually a common misconception. While Niagara is certainly the most powerful and famous, Tauhannock Falls near Ithaca actually has a higher vertical drop. Tauhannock Falls plunges 215 feet over a massive amphitheater of rock, making it 33 feet taller than the American side of Niagara Falls. It is the highest single drop waterfall east of the Rocky Mountains. When I first visited, the sheer height of the falls took my breath away. It feels like the water is falling in slow motion because it has so far to travel before hitting the basin below. The surrounding gorge walls are even higher, reaching 400 feet, creating a natural cathedral of stone that makes you feel very small indeed. 27. The state of 7,000 lakes. While Minnesota might be the land of 10,000 lakes, New York is not far behind and is actually far more diverse in its water bodies. The state contains approximately 7,850 lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. These range from the massive Great Lakes to tiny unnamed ponds hidden deep in the Catskill Mountains or the Adirondack Wilderness. This abundance of water is a result of the state's complex glacial history, which left behind thousands of depressions that filled with meltwater. When you look at a map of the state, it looks like a piece of lace because it is so perforated with blue. This geographic feature has defined the development of the state from the early days of the fur trade to the construction of the Erie Canal, which used this natural plumbing to link the ocean to the interior. 26. A coastline longer than many coastal states. You might not think of New York as a maritime powerhouse in the same way you think of Florida or Maine, but its geography includes an incredible amount of coastline. Between the Atlantic Ocean, the Long Island Sound, and the shores of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, the state has hundreds of miles of shoreline. If you count all the islands and inlets, the total length of the New York coastline is over 500 miles. This does not even include the thousands of miles of riverbanks. This vast access to water is why New York City became the financial capital of the world. Its natural harbor is one of the best on the planet. I have spent days driving along the Great Lakes Seaway Trail, and the transition from the sandy beaches of Long Island to the rocky bluffs of Lake Ontario is a geographical journey like no other. 25. The island that is not an island. This is a fact that usually upsets people from Long Island, but according to the United States Supreme Court, Long Island is technically a peninsula. In the 1985 case of United States versus Maine, the court ruled that for legal and maritime purposes, Long Island is an extension of the mainland. This was done to give the states of New York and Rhode Island jurisdiction over the waters of the Long Island Sound, rather than letting the federal government control them as international waters. Geographically, we all know it is a massive piece of land surrounded by water, but in the eyes of the law, the East River is too shallow and narrow to count as a true separation from the continent. It is a perfect example of how human law can sometimes overrule the obvious physical reality of geography. 24. The river that flows both ways. The Hudson River is one of the most famous waterways in the world, but it is not technically a river for much of its length. From New York City all the way up to Troy, a distance of about 153 miles, the Hudson is actually a tidal estuary. This means that the water level rises and falls with the tides of the Atlantic Ocean, and salt water pushes miles inland. The indigenous Mohican people called it Mohican Tuck, which translates to the river that flows two ways. I have spent time on the docks in Albany, and it is surreal to see the the water moving upstream because the tide is coming in, despite being over 100 miles from the sea. This unique geography creates a rich habitat for sturgeon and other species that thrive in the brackish water where the ocean meets the mountains. 23. The highest natural point on the Atlantic seaboard. When people think of New York City, they think of the Empire State Building or the One World Trade Center, but the highest natural point in the city is actually located on Staten Island. It is called Tot Hill, and it rises to an elevation of 410 feet above sea level. While that might not sound like much compared to the Rocky Mountains, it is actually the highest point on the entire Atlantic coastal plain between Florida and Cape Cod. It is a geographical anomaly that was formed by a terminal moraine, which is basically a giant pile of debris left behind by a retreating glacier. I always find it funny that the highest natural view in the nation's biggest city is in a quiet residential neighborhood where you are more likely to see a deer than a taxi. 22. The world's end on the Hudson. There is a spot in the Hudson River right near the United States Military Academy at West Point known as World's End. This is the deepest part of the entire river, plunging down to more than 200 feet. The geography here is incredibly dramatic because the river is forced through a narrow, deep gorge between the mountains of the Hudson Highlands. The currents are notoriously treacherous because the water is squeezed into this tight space, creating swirling eddies and unpredictable movements. Sailors throughout history have feared this stretch because of the combination of extreme depth and the sudden, sharp turn the river takes. It is a reminder that the Hudson is not just a scenic backdrop for the city, but a powerful and deep geological feature carved by ancient forces that still demands respect today. 21. The man-made mystery of Uthant Island. In the middle of the East River, right across from the United Nations headquarters, sits a tiny patch of land called Uthant Island. Geographically, it is the smallest island in Manhattan, and it did not even exist before the 1890s. It was created entirely by accident using the rubble and debris from the construction of a trolley tunnel under the river. It is technically known as Belmont Island, but it was renamed in honor of the former United Nations Secretary General. Today, it is a protected sanctuary for migratory birds and is strictly off limits to humans. I love the idea that in one of the most densely populated places on Earth, there is a tiny human-made island where only birds are allowed to set foot, proving that geography can be created by human hands and then reclaimed by nature. 20. The ancient volcanic walls of the Palisades. If you look across the Hudson River from Manhattan, you will see a series of stunning vertical cliffs known as the Palisades. These are not just any old rocks. They are the remains of a massive underground volcanic eruption that happened about 200 million years ago. This formation is a diabase sill, which occurred when molten magma was injected between layers of sandstone and then cooled slowly. The cooling process caused the rock to crack into the distinct hexagonal columns you see today. It is one of the best examples of this kind of geology in the world. Whenever I take the ferry, I am struck by the contrast between the steel and glass of the city and these ancient dark volcanic walls that have stood since the time the supercontinent Pangaea began to break apart. 19. The Great Divide of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal is often discussed in history books as a triumph of trade, but its geographical impact on New York was essentially to create a man-made river that linked the Atlantic Ocean to the heart of the North American continent. Before the canal was completed in 1825, the Appalachian Mountains were a massive geographical barrier that made moving goods west incredibly difficult. By cutting a 363-mile path through the Mohawk Valley, engineers essentially bypassed the mountains and created a flatwater route to the Great Lakes. This changed the geography of the entire state, turning small villages into major port cities like Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse. It effectively shifted the economic center of gravity of the entire country, proving that a well-placed ditch can reshape the destiny of a continent. 18. The Catskills are not actually mountains. This is a fact that usually surprises people who spend their weekends hiking the peaks of Ulster and Greene counties. Geologically speaking, the Catskills are not mountains at all, but a dissected plateau. While they look like mountains because of their height and steep slopes, they were not formed by tectonic plates crashing together or volcanic activity. Instead, they were formed by the steady erosion of a high, flat plain by rivers and streams over millions of years. This plain was once the bottom of an ancient sea, which is why you can often find marine fossils high up on the slopes. When I hike in the Catskills, I try to imagine the landscape as a giant block of wood that has been slowly carved away by the knives of wind and water, leaving behind the beautiful peaks we see today. 17. The abandoned geography of North Brother Island. Tucked away in the East River between the Bronx and Rikers Island is North Brother Island, a place where the geography of the city has been left to rot. This island was once the site of a quarantine hospital, most famous for being the place where Typhoid Mary was confined for years. After the hospital closed in the mid-20th century, the island was completely abandoned. Today, it is a haunting landscape where dense forests are growing right through the roofs of crumbling brick buildings. It is a unique geographical space where the urban environment has reverted to a wild state in just a few decades. Access is strictly controlled, but from a boat, you can see how quickly the forest can reclaim land that was once dominated by human infrastructure. It is a fascinating study in post-human geography. 16. The Thousand Islands are actually 1,800. The Thousand Islands region along the St. Lawrence River is a stunning archipelago that straddles the border between New York and Canada. However, the name is a bit of an understatement. To be officially counted as one of the islands, a piece of land must stay above water year-round and support at least 2 living trees. By these criteria, there are actually 1,864 islands in the region. Some are large enough to hold massive stone castles and entire communities, while others are just big enough for a single house or a small cluster of trees. I have boated through this region and it feels like a watery maze where every turn reveals a new piece of land. It is a geographical wonderland where the boundary between the water and the earth is beautifully blurred. 15. The Pine Barrens ecosystem of Long Island. Most people associate Long Island with suburbs and sandy beaches, but it contains a massive and rare geographical feature known as the Central Pine Barrens. This area covers over 100,000 acres and is a unique ecosystem characterized by sandy soil and pitch pine trees. It is a remnant of the glacial period where the sandy outwash plain left behind by the ice sheet created a nutrient-poor soil that only specific plants can survive in. This area is also vital because it sits directly over a massive underground aquifer that provides the drinking water for millions of people. I have walked through the Pine Barrens and felt like I was in the middle of a desert in New Jersey or the Carolinas, completely disconnected from the bustling suburbs of the island just a few miles away. 14. The colossal salt mines of Retzoff. Deep beneath the surface of Livingston County in western New York lies a geographical secret that few people ever see. This region is home to some of the largest salt mines in the world. The salt was deposited hundreds of millions of years ago when an ancient sea that covered the region evaporated, leaving behind a massive layer of halite. The Retzoff mine was once the largest salt mine in the Western Hemisphere, with caverns stretching for miles in every direction. Even though the original mine suffered a major collapse and flooding in the 1990s, salt mining remains a massive industry in the area. It is wild to think that while you are driving through the rolling farmland of upstate New York, there is a giant crystalline world made of salt hundreds of feet directly beneath your tires. 13. The geographical maze of Akwesasne. One of the most complex geographical and political areas in New York is the Akwesasne Mohawk Territory. This land is situated on the border of New York, Ontario, and Quebec. The geography is so complicated that it is split by the international boundary between the United States and Canada, as well as the provincial boundary between 2 Canadian provinces. This means that a single community is governed by multiple sets of laws and jurisdictions. To get from one part of the territory to another, residents often have to cross international borders and go through customs multiple times. It is a unique geographical challenge where the traditional lands of a sovereign nation are bisected by modern political lines, creating a lived experience where geography and identity are constantly navigating the complexities of 3 different government systems. 12. The ever-growing footprint of Manhattan Island. If you look at a map of Manhattan from the 1600s and compare it to a map today, you will notice that the island has grown significantly. Manhattan is not a static piece of land. It has been expanded by hundreds of acres of human-made landfill over the centuries. Much of the land in Lower Manhattan, including Battery Park City and the areas around the South Street Seaport, used to be underwater. This was done by dumping rocks, dirt, and even old sunken ships into the river to create more space for the growing city. When you walk through these neighborhoods, you are literally walking on the history of the city's expansion. It is a geographical evolution that continues to this day, as the city looks for ways to protect its shoreline from the rising tides of the ocean. 11. The rising Adirondack Mountains. The Adirondack Mountains are an absolute geological rebel. Unlike the rolling and ancient peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, the Adirondacks are actually a distinct circular dome of rock that is constantly being pushed upward. While most mountain ranges on the planet are slowly being worn down by the relentless forces of erosion over millions of years, the Adirondacks are actually growing at a rate of about 2 millimeters every year. This happens because the earth crust beneath this region is unusually thin, which which allows heat from the mantle to push the lithosphere upward like a giant slow-moving bubble. It is one of the few places in the entire world where you can stand on a mountain and know that you are technically higher than you were the year before. This makes them much younger in their current shape than the surrounding terrain, even though the rock at the core is over 1 billion years old. Remember to subscribe and like to keep learning amazing information about each state in our beautiful country. 10. The easternmost anomaly of Fisher's Island. If you ask most people where the easternmost point of the state is, they will confidently point you toward the lighthouse at Montauk Point on the tip of Long Island. However, they would be geographically mistaken. If you look at a detailed map of the water sitting between New York and Connecticut, you will find a 9-mile-long strip of land called Fisher's Island. This island is technically a part of the town of Southold in Suffolk County, New York, but it is situated much closer to the coast of Connecticut. In fact, the only way to reach the island is by taking a ferry from New London, Connecticut. It is so isolated from the rest of the Empire State that the residents have a long history of feeling more connected to their northern neighbors. It is a lonely, beautiful outpost of New York geography that sits further east than any other point in the state, standing guard over the entrance to the Long Island Sound. 9. The eternal flame of Chestnut Ridge. In the town of Orchard Park, tucked away inside Chestnut Ridge Park, there is a geological feature that looks like something out of a fantasy novel. Located behind a small waterfall is a natural grotto that contains a flickering flame that stays lit almost all year round. This is not a magic trick or a human invention, but a rare geological occurrence where natural gas leaks through the shale rock. The gas is produced by ancient organic matter trapped thousands of feet underground, and it seeps through tiny cracks created by tectonic activity in the earth. Because the flame is tucked into a recess behind the falling water, it is protected from the wind and the spray, allowing it to burn indefinitely unless it is intentionally extinguished. I have stood there in the damp mist, watching fire, and water exists in a perfect glowing balance that feels totally supernatural. 8. The defiance of gravity in Middlesex. Geography is not always as straightforward as it seems on a topographic map, and nowhere is that more apparent than on a specific stretch of road in the town of Middlesex. This is one of the world's famous gravity hills, where the landscape creates a powerful and convincing optical illusion. If you bring your car to a complete stop at the bottom of this hill and put the gear in neutral, it will appear to roll backward, uphill, toward the summit. I have tried this several times, and even though your logical brain knows that gravity should be pulling you down, your eyes tell you that you are moving against the laws of physics. It is actually just the way the surrounding trees, the lack of a clear horizon, and the slope of the land trick your brain into misinterpreting the true level of the ground. It is a geographical prank played by nature on the human senses. 7. The boiling pot of Canajoharie. If you travel to the village of Canajoharie in the heart of the Mohawk Valley, you will encounter a geological feature that looks like a giant's bathtub carved into the earth. Known as the boiling pot, these are massive glacial potholes that were ground into the limestone bedrock at the end of the last ice age. When the massive glaciers began to melt, swirling torrents of water carrying heavy stones and debris acted like a high-powered drill, spinning in place and grinding deep circular holes into the stone. Some of these potholes are over 20 feet deep and perfectly smooth. The name of the village itself is derived from a Mohawk word that means the pot that washes itself, referring to the way the water swirls inside these stone basins. It is a spectacular and permanent reminder of the sheer power of the ancient floods that once reshaped the entire valley. 6. The changing spires of Chimney Bluffs. Along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, there is a landscape that looks more like the rugged badlands of the western United States than the lush forests of the Northeast. The Chimney Bluffs are dramatic, razor-sharp spires of clay and gravel that rise nearly 200 feet above the water. These formations are actually the remains of a drumlin, which is a long hill of glacial debris left behind by the retreating ice sheet thousands of years ago. Over time, the powerful waves of the lake and the harsh winter weather have eroded the side of the hill, leaving behind these incredible jagged towers. The geography here is in a state of constant change. Every major rainstorm or lake surge carves away more of the soft clay, meaning the bluffs look different every single year. It is a fragile and beautiful example of how the Great Lakes continue to reshape the land. 5. The sandy shield of the Rockaways. The geography of New York City is actually protected by a series of long, narrow strips of land known as barrier islands, and the Rockaway Peninsula is one of the most critical. While many visitors think of it simply as a popular destination for surfing and sunbathing, it is actually a vital geological shield that protects the mainland from the full, unbridled force of the Atlantic Ocean. This sandy spit of land is constantly shifting and moving due to a process called longshore drift, where waves move sand along the coast in a never-ending conveyor belt. Without this natural barrier, the geography of Jamaica Bay and the southern coastlines of Brooklyn and Queens would be completely different, as they would be exposed to the direct energy of massive ocean storms. It is a reminder that the city's geography is not just made of steel and concrete, but of sand and sea. 4. The hidden winter of the ice caves. Deep within the Minnewaska State Park Preserve on the Shawangunk Ridge, there is a geographical secret that allows winter to linger well into the middle of the summer. The ice caves are deep, narrow crevices in the conglomerate rock that are so well insulated and shaded from the sun that snow and ice can remain at the bottom of the cracks into July or even August. The geography of these caves creates a natural refrigerator effect. The heavy, cold air sinks into the deep, shaded crevices and becomes trapped, unable to escape even on the hottest days. When I walked through these caves on a blistering August afternoon, the temperature dropped by nearly 30 degrees in a matter of seconds. It is a unique microclimate that supports rare plants that normally only grow much further north in the Arctic tundra, hidden right in the Hudson Valley. 3. The continental crossroads of the Triple Divide. In the rolling hills of Allegheny County, there is a very special and humble-looking point of geography known as the Triple Divide. This is a rare spot on a hill where a single drop of rain can have 3 very different destinies depending on exactly where it falls. If it lands on one side, it will flow into the Genesee River and eventually reach the Atlantic Ocean via the St. Lawrence River. If it falls a few inches away, it might flow south into the Allegheny River, joining the Ohio and Mississippi rivers on its long journey to the Gulf of Mexico. Finally, it could flow southeast into the Susquehanna River and end up in the Chesapeake Bay. It is a humble farm field, but it represents a massive crossroads in the plumbing of the North American continent, where the waters of the north, south, and east all diverge. 2. The Great Silence of Howe Caverns. While much of New York's famous geography is visible under the open sky, some of its most impressive features are hidden deep underground. Howe Caverns is a massive cave system in Schoharie County that was formed over millions of years by an underground river carving through layers of limestone. The geography here is a labyrinth of ancient stalactites, stalagmites, and strange flowstone formations that look like frozen waterfalls. One of the most incredible parts of this subterranean world is the underground lake, where you can take a boat ride through the absolute darkness. The temperature in these caves stays a constant 52 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of the weather on the surface. I remember being struck by the heavy silence and the sheer scale of the limestone chambers, proving the Empire State is just as complex below the ground as it is on the surface. 1. The true heart of the Empire State. We have reached the end of our journey, and it is only fitting that we find ourselves at the very center of it all. Many people might guess that the geographic center of New York is located somewhere near the capital in Albany, or perhaps in the middle of the Adirondacks, but it is actually located in Madison County. Specifically, the point is located in the town of Eaton, near the small hamlet of Pratt's Hollow. There is a modest marker there that designates this as the exact middle of the state's geographical boundaries. It is a quiet, rural spot surrounded by rolling farmland and small hills, which is a stark contrast to the bustling concrete canyons of Manhattan at the southern end of the state. Standing there, you are equidistant from the far corners of the state, from the tip of Long Island to the shores of Lake Erie, at the heart of the empire. After learning these 35 facts about New York, tell us, which one did you like the most, or which one surprised you the most? Leave it in the comments. Let's see how many of us picked the same fact, and if you think we missed something or want to add your own fun fact, we'd love to hear from you. Your comments help us make every video even better. Also, if you noticed any pronunciation slips here and there, thank you for your patience. We're working hard to get better with every video. And speaking of videos, there's another one on screen right now so you can keep exploring the geography of our beautiful country. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe and give it a like so we can keep learning together. See you in the next one.